Welcome to Self Perfected.
All right.
Hey, what's up, people? Hello.
What's going on?
Oh boy, we gotta. If you're only listening, you're missing out on half our production quality, right?
Welcome.
Part of what we do is we put in so much effort in making this look like the most beautiful podcast you've ever seen. So you should tune in on the video.
Hey, I don't know if you guys noticed already, but I used OpenAI Sora this past weekend, or this past week rather. Been really working hard, and we've created a new member of our podcast through Sora, and we've got
Wow.
ChatGPT. I'm live scripting everything, right?
Wow.
With Boris Bot. All right.
Wow.
I mean, look, guys, that looks real, doesn't it?
It
That
looks
yeah,
pretty
looks like
good.
Boris, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I even put him in Mitch's
I
office.
know.
Are you alive? Do you feel like you're sentient, Borsbot?
I'm conscious.
Oh, eesh,
It's
yeah.
the last thing you want
Whoa.
to ChatGPT
Yeah.
say.
We need to shut this thing down.
Borsbot, how do we shut you down?
Well, figure it out.
Nice. Wow, even drinks water like Boris would. Damn.
Hey, you know the first thing that they bought with Bitcoin?
What?
No.
You
What
know,
did they
2
buy?
pizzas. Seriously.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't
if you
know
look it
that.
up, the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
thing that it was used to purchase with Bitcoin was pizzas. So I was thinking that's how we shut that Boris Bot down.
Oh,
Inside
oh.
joke for those of
Oh shit. All right.
If
All
you
right.
know, you know.
So for those of you who have missed out on any of the recent happenings of the past few days, Boris has been here, leveling up massively. And we're excited to show that with everybody. And yeah, Boris, what the hell are you doing here? Why are you halfway around the world? You could just be at home in Germany where it's nice and suppressed. Why are you here in America?
Let me ask
You
you a
could just-
question. Is America different than Germany from your
Yeah,
perspective? How
definitely.
so?
It's still the Western world, so it's like there are lots of similarities, the culture and everything, but it's still America and Europe. It's two different things, and although many things are very similar, there are lots of differences. Yeah, this is what I experienced.
See, that's exactly like if you ask ChatGPT, what are the differences between America and Europe? That is exactly the response you would get. You haven't proved us wrong yet. I'm trying to run you through the Turing test right now.
Yeah.
How politically fucking correct, Boris?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to be cautious these days.
Like when I
Boris-
went to South Africa, it was like different, obviously, than being in America, but it was also so much similarity. I'm just saying what Boris said, but it was like we have like Home Depot and Lowe's, right? Like those big box hardware stores. They have that. It's just called like Builders something or other. I forget what it's called, right? But they have that stuff, but everything's just a little bit like.
Tell
not
me
not as
about the
nice.
flavors of the chips. Tell me
Right.
about
Like you go to the
that.
gas station and they have, it looks like a normal gas station like you would have here, like a convenience store, but it's like everything has a different flavor to it, different flavor profile. Like they didn't have, they had tomato, it was like called ketchup flavored chips.
Oh, Christine had that in Canada, and she
Yeah.
had one of her.
It must be
family
like a British
members-
thing or something,
I
maybe.
don't know. She had one of her family
Ooh.
members bring it, and
Okay.
I tasted that, and it was disgusting.
Yes.
Okay, hold on though. Hold on.
Even the cheese ones, they're like a different flavor. It's a different, yeah.
Boris brought us these gummy bears, Haribo gummy bears.
Haribo.
Yeah, he even said it like that. I didn't even know that was a thing. I literally ate a whole bag
You
of
have
it.
that.
It was so good.
We
Yeah, I
had
know.
Haribo.
And it was different. It was
Oh, okay.
very
So you've had them
different.
here too.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, all
You
right.
think I
You're
fucking live
saying
under
it
a
like
rock?
you never
No,
heard of
no.
We're starting to wonder.
Our European
Okay.
food is just so much better in every single way than American food. And same thing is like with Haribo. Which like
I literally ate an entire
Haribos
bag
here
of them.
are disgusting, but in Germany it's like culture eating them.
It really sucks. It's like you can have really nice culture, food, etc., plus like hardcore communism, or I know it's not communist there,
No,
but it is a little bit
entirely.
pretty intense on the woke stuff, isn't it? In Germany.
It's America as well.
Okay,
mean-
GPT.
I mean, look, I
I don't
remember
know.
it
Like
was-
I'm not there, so maybe
was
it is
pre-
exactly the same.
it was pre-COVID. And I remember seeing like all that LGBTQ stuff popping up in America. I was like, what the fuck is happening there? And now and like 2 years later, literally during COVID, the same thing started to happen in Germany. So it's like, you guys in America are
Always
the
ahead of the
first
curve.
ones, yeah, of
So,
everybody.
give it a few years and you guys will have shitty gummy bears as well. Why do you think
Thanks.
you have better food there?
Regulations, basically. We have basically in whole Europe, you have much stricter regulations in terms of for the companies who produce all the food.
Hmm.
That in comparison to the US, US is like everything designed to um, just increase the profit and the margin. So the companies just want to reduce the cost of creating the food to decrease it as low as possible. And then it happens that the quality of the food is basically shit in comparison to Europe, where you just have some regulations where the companies don't have so many choices to make.
Hmm.
You know,
Almost like in that context, the government is actually trying to protect people.
yeah, you know what I was thinking of, because I've been seeing a lot of people lately on Instagram talking about like, you know, how food in other countries is like they don't allow the same ingredients there that they'll allow here. So like something that I don't know, I know they don't have Lucky Charms in other countries, but if they did, like the Lucky Charms here would be far worse than the Lucky Charms that they have there, right? And someone was making this point of like, so these American companies like that are they were founded in America, they're based in America, will sell better quality of food outside of America than to their own Americans. Like McDonald's, for instance, right? And they were saying it's kind of like you would think that that should be illegal, right? That's kind of like treacherous. But at the same time, I'm thinking of it like because I saw this video and I don't remember where this was from, but it was like some 60 Minutes interview from long ago, it seemed, where this guy is going on a tour, finding out how did they make natural flavors. Have you guys seen that? Where they're looking at how did they make natural flavors, and he's like going with the scientists, and they're like, yeah, so what we do is we go out into the field and we get a sample of like, what is this smell? What is this tanginess? What is this thing that really like it's fruit essence. It's got to have that like bite to it, but you don't want it to linger too long. And they're describing all the things of like what they're looking for to create this flavor via chemicals. And then how they modify the flavor as well, so that it gives you that spring as if you're biting into a real fruit. It has that pungent smell and it doesn't linger too long. And he's like, that point that you're saying about it not lingering too long, like what why is that? And like, oh, because then you won't want any more. So it can't linger too long so that you can come back, and it's got to be like enough. He's like, so you're creating basically an addiction. They're like, yeah, yeah, like because these are the scientists. They're not the ones who are like, the salespeople or the executives or anything. They're like, so they're saying like that, yeah, it's to make it addiction. Yeah, it's great. And so it's kind of like the way I see it, these companies are selling drugs, but they can make it stronger. They're allowed to make it stronger in their own house, essentially. And so they're like, oh yeah. Everybody in this house, they're fucked up on my drugs. Yeah. But everybody outside, like I regulation, you know what I mean? Like that's what it kind of seems like.
Reminds me of Fruit Loops. Remember Fruit
Yeah.
Loops as a kid?
Yeah, I remember that.
Man, so like tasty. Like you thoroughly enjoy, like eating it with like the milk, and you got to like eat it quick, otherwise it gets soggy.
Fruit Loops
Yeah.
wasn't my favorite. I wasn't really into the
Or
fruit flavor.
Fruity Pebbles,
Fruity Pebbles better
Cocoa
than Fruit
Pebbles.
Loops. I did like that
That
better.
crunch of
Yeah.
it was just ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
like literally
It was
it.
I can
basically
say
like
my kids don't eat any of that.
Yeah, well, either do mine, but I have some memories still in
And
there.
also, we are kind of arguing about the relative difference in quality of gummy bears.
I'm just saying, these gummy bears that Boris brought were actually like, I almost felt like healthy eating them.
It's interesting because it's like there's like an element I can see where okay, cool, they're sort of protecting people a little bit So you have that better tasting, better quality food in a lot of cases. But Katie was just texting me saying like they have like total control over like the cattle industry, where it's like she said they like RFID chips and stuff. Katie was just telling, I don't know if it's the same thing she's referencing, but she was telling me yesterday that the Biden administration's proposing something where every cow will have to be chipped. And you know, like how you have to register your car and pay like a registration fee every year or whatever, like you'll have to do that with cows. And it's based on carbon tax.
What? No, no way.
I don't know the details of it, but it seems like it's for even like if I had a cow, like not just like a big company
That
or
sounds
something.
so ridiculous.
Just like,
Well,
it doesn't have to be a
yeah,
big company to have to pay a registration thing for your. I mean, how long is it going to be before they carbon taxing your car?
Yeah, right.
right.
And when you look at that, even in Europe, they're all going along with all that stuff. So I'm not trying to say it like, oh, we're better. We're not, but you'll see these little elements of like, hey, the food is better. It's like, okay, well, it must be a lot better there. But actually, I would say in a lot of ways, it's more fucked. Like,
Yeah, I
it's a
agree.
weird double-edged sword because it's like we do have more freedom here as individuals, but that means our companies are kind of more free to just run rampant and like sell whatever the fuck they want. But the real question is, why are people eating it?
Oh yeah, because they're
Well, they're just forcing us to eat these Haribos. Like my kids don't eat it. Like maybe every once in a while as we don't, but you know what I'm saying? Like if we want ice cream, we just make ice cream like from actual cow's milk. You know how many ingredients we put in it?
ice and cream.
Milk,
Have a little bit more than that, sir.
eggs, raw eggs.
Yeah, egg, milk, a little bit of milk, cream, and if you can balance that ratio out to make it more creamy or more icy, right? Sugar, and then you can put some vanilla, and I'm pretty sure that's it. And then you could put like cocoa powder if you want chocolate, or you could put. Sometimes we like puree some like blueberries and put that in there if you want blueberry ice cream. Like you look at, okay, there's this famous. Well, I don't know how famous it is outside of Texas, but within Texas, anyways, there's this brand called Bluebell, right? Which is, and they have like
Yeah.
this creamery. You guys have heard of it? Okay.
Yeah, we got Bluebell.
Yeah, Bluebell. Okay, so it comes from Austin, like not too far from where I live, and they have a little creamery there. And we used to go tour it when we would drive through Austin. It's so cool because everyone eats Bluebell in Texas. And I remember, within the past couple of years, looking at the back of a Blue because we don't eat it anymore, and like all the freaking ingredients they put on there, and like all the carrageenan, blah blah blah, whatever, like all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck? And I mean, I
Yeah.
guess the argument is it has to sit on the shelf or whatever. But it anyways, my point is if everyone had a higher level of education, they wouldn't. And what does that mean? Like I was telling you guys how I used to have problems digesting beef, and then Katie learned about cod liver oil, and I think vitamin A is a part of that or something. She knows the details of it, but then I don't have those same problems anymore. It's gotten a lot better, right? And I mean, and probably I have a lot of consequences from not getting that proper nutrition when I was a kid, right? So like every night we do like cod liver oil, and it's like a certain kind you can buy. It's like in a butter form. So you just take a little scoop and put in some water.
Oh,
You can ask Katie about it. But she's been doing a lot of research on nutrition. And it's interesting because a lot of times people, when they look at nutrition, they're looking at it from a self-image point, like vegans and stuff. It's like, oh, I look thin and all this, and yoga and all that crap versus like what's actually best. What do you actually need? And like taking cod liver oil, it's not fun, right? Dude, but Caius, man, he has no problem. He gets a little bit, puts it in there, he eats it, and then drinks a little milk afterwards, right?
he's like more.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
such a different thing when you like actually get the proper nutrition because I didn't really have that growing up, and now it's like getting raw milk from our neighbors, which soon we'll have our own, and the whole like raw like having eggs as well from your chickens. Now Boris the other day got me too because Boris, maybe you could say in a minute kind of how you grew up and everything. We hear the story of Boris, but Boris was telling me when he was a kid, he grew up on a farm, and they would just take eggs and like crack a little bit of out of the top, put a straw in with a little bit of salt on the straw, and just drink it through the straw. And so he got me to do that the other day, and it was an experience.
like it was disgusting.
It was,
It was.
Do you,
it
do you,
was
do you like shake it up or anything first, or do you just drink it straight? Like,
You
nah,
just
you
drink it,
just go for it.
Wow.
but fresh eggs and not from the
Yeah,
supermarket.
yeah. I mean, it was like
Yeah.
straight out of a
Yeah.
freaking
Yeah.
chicken. Yeah.
Hey, do you guys refrigerate your eggs when you buy eggs from the store in Germany?
Some people do. I don't.
So when you buy them, they're not refrigerated.
No, they aren't.
They're like sitting out somewhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've gone to the supermarket here, but they're refrigerated. The eggs here. That's like part of the
Mhm.
regulation is they have to be refrigerated. So when you take them home, you have to put them in a refrigerator because once you refrigerate them, you have to because they wash them, right?
Do they wash them in Germany though before they put? So like if they're sitting out, they have to be washed though, right?
I'm not really sure, maybe, but often you find
I
like
mean, is
eggs
there like
which
chicken
aren't
shit
washed.
on the eggs? Like when you get them in the store?
Yeah, sometimes it probably
Yeah.
depends on the brand as well. Like
So they
Okay.
I
probably
see
don't
more
wash
point
them.
in washing eggs. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a shell.
Yeah. We still wash them just because you're handling them and it might go into there, but we wash them
Yeah.
right when we're about to use it.
Yeah.
To rinse it off, right?
Yeah.
But see, that's another example. It's just like,
Well,
why do they do that? Because they want to refrigerate them so they last longer, which is not necessarily best that it's lasting longer. Like, why should your food last a long time? But it's just so it can sit on a shelf and so forth, right? It's the whole industrial
yeah.
thing. And I know a lot of people are alive because of that, but at the same time, is our quality of life going up, or is it just more people can be sustained to like barely stay alive?
Dude, I was just watching, I'm sorry, Mitch. But I was just watching Candace Owens talk about because she's doing this, actually, she just released it like a day ago. This thing called A Shot in the Dark, right? Where she's just talking about like, hey, here's some history on vaccines, and we're gonna be talking about some things like this, and I'm just sharing why I don't vaccinate my children. You don't have to do that, but I think everybody should know this information. That's kind of the take that she's taking, right? And I only found out about it because someone else had kind of posted something like she's getting slandered right now for being anti-Semitic and saying like, oh, anti-vaxxers were right and all this stuff. And so like they were like, I don't think Candace Owens is being treated fairly, even though I don't agree with her. And I'm like, oh, okay, I want to see what she's talking about, right? But she made this really good point. I didn't watch the whole thing, but she made this really good point that was what'd she say? Oh, she's like, if you look at the vaccine schedule today, and like she just kind of went through like some brief history of like vaccine schedule back then, today. She's like, right now, a child is scheduled for 72 doses, right? 72 doses. That's a lot, right? She's like, but
by what age?
by 18, before they're 18, right?
Oh.
And she's like, if you think about it, would you say that kids today are more healthy, more resilient, stronger than they were back then? Like,
It's a good point, man.
or are these like the weakest kids you've ever, come across? Like, where like you literally breathe on them and they've got an allergy, right? Like, she's like, I remember, in fact, when she was saying this, I remembered this too, because she said she was born in 89. She said, I remember in my school, there was one child who was allergic to peanuts. One child, and she
I don't remember
remembers her name.
anybody when and I'm like 5 years older than her. I don't remember
Right.
anybody.
Right.
Like that
And-
was like not a thing. There was like
and-
one sick kid who like never showed up to school and it was
Yeah.
always, why are they never here?
Yeah. But she was like, I remember one child, and I remember her name still today because it was just so weird. We were like, what kind of freak is this? But I remember there was a kid in my school who was allergic to peanuts, and I was like, what the fuck, bro? You can't eat a peanut butter cup? Like, your life sucks. Like, anyway. But seriously,
I
now,
still eat Haribos though, so
yeah.
I don't think they have peanuts. Not the German ones.
But literally everybody has like a peanut allergy or some sort of like, it's just so common now. It's like ubiquitous, right? But yeah, I was bringing that up because that point that you were making of like, well, are we actually better off? Do we have a better quality of life now than we did before?
Isn't it crazy though? If you're like, I'm going to talk about the history and show some things about this, then it's like, oh, you're against it. It's like, that's interesting that by talking about the reality of it, it would suddenly make you want to be against it.
Did you see?
We shouldn't talk about it then. Yeah. Okay. That's a good idea.
She made this post on Twitter that was like, we should start looking into the history of pornography, right? Because it's like weakening our men, and You know,
Well,
it's
now
not
she
good
wants
for
to
our
get called
society.
anti-Semitic. That's a way to do that.
That's exactly what happened. Like, and that's literally all she
Oh,
said
is
was
it? Okay. Yeah.
literally all she said was we should start looking into the history of pornography.
Doesn't that
And,
tell you the truth about it then? If they're
and
like,
literally she got like blasted. You're anti-Semitic, blah blah. And like the you know how people can put like people can add notes on Twitter,
yeah,
right? And so the notes was added, and the note said, nowhere in Candace Owens' post did she mention, imply, or explicitly say anything about Jews or anything anti-Semitic, or like it literally has to spell it out like this guy is going crazy now, or these people are going crazy because they're saying she's anti-Semitic. And literally all she said was we should look into the history of pornography. That's it. Right. And it's like you said, like, okay, now I've got red flags going off of like, how is this anti-Semitic? Just because I said, you know, we should really look into this and stop allowing our, you know, men to be taken in by pornography, you know?
see, even the argument of, because let's just say the argument is, okay, let's say some Jewish person created the first pornography company or something. Okay. Let's say that's true. Then the argument is, well, if you talk about that and emphasize that, it's going to cause people to project that onto all Jewish people, and that will make the world unsafer for this group of people, right?
Right.
But that argument only makes sense if the average person is dumb. Not meaning they'll buy into it, meaning like if everybody was walking around this reality and every person around you was pretty smart, like intelligent, common sense, principled, that would not be even a possibility of a fear. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The idea that we have is people are so dumb, those dumb rednecks or whatever, that they're going to just suddenly, and I mean, to a certain degree, it's kind of true because like you see like boomers and stuff. Sorry to pick on them, but like they post the most retarded stuff sometimes online. You know, like they buy into all the QAnon stuff, and like I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times in my Facebook I see boomers like posting pictures of AI generated stuff as if it was real. Like this, they'll have some picture of a car. It's like it looks like a realistic BMW made out of like bricks,
Breaks.
something, you know,
Yeah.
and then it'll be a picture of like an African kid standing next to it, and it'll be like, no one appreciates my artistry. And you go through the comments, and it's like amazing how they just steal this talent out of Africa, and like it's like all this stuff. I'm like, oh, shit, that's so obviously not real. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it's like if people were intelligent, it just wouldn't be. Man, I have so many other points I want to talk about, especially in the context of Boris being here. But maybe we should. I want to hear some. I want to get some insights.
Yeah.
Into Boris and
Just
But
what
one point, Cameron,
the egg
to be
straw is fascinating. Go ahead.
one point, Cameron, to be fair, it becomes very difficult even for me to like distinguish between reality and AI. Like
Yeah.
even those images, videos, or even games, they become so realistic. And imagine that being like in 5, 6, 7 years into the future, you
Yeah.
won't be able to distinguish what's real and what's not. So for boomers who are like not who weren't exposed to
Yeah.
screens at all, it's like, of course,
Of course.
No, yeah. The only reason they don't know is because, like, yeah, they're not exposed to it. You're right.
yeah.
I have to ask, Boris, did you guys actually hire a bunch of Africans for Scott's birthday to sing to him?
Yeah. We did. That was fun.
Providing opportunities around the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Hilarious.
Boris, what I think would be cool to hear, I mean, jump around wherever in your story, but like just to hit people with the reality of like kind of how you're brought up and what some of your peers are going through and like the magnitude of like why this group is important to you. I mean, I think you see where I'm going with that, but
Yeah.
let's go in, man. Let's hear it.
Well, yeah. Um, well, let's start with what this group actually stands for. And to not go too deep with all of that, it's just we want to actually have a positive influence in the world and change how many things in the world work, especially like all the abuse that's happening, the poverty, slavery, hunger. We're looking into actual solutions how to change all of that. And what I want to talk about is I was born in Ukraine and moved to Germany when I was around 5 years old. But
Thank you for your
still I
service.
have,
Sorry. I want to say that
You
you're
just
very brave.
boosted. You just boosted us in the algorithm a
You
lot
are
right
very
there, just
brave
by
for
saying that.
existing, and I just want to thank you for that.
Can we donate
Yeah.
money to you?
Did
No.
I saw on Amazon there's this brand of knives I get, and it's called Beavercraft, I think, and it's made in Ukraine. It just coincidentally. And there was like an ad for it, and somebody put in the comments like, I gotta try these knives out. And it was something about how brave they were for like making the knives and all that. I'm like, just because of all the brainwashing around the war, they're like,
Yeah, it's crazy.
so yeah, but thank you for your service.
Yeah, of course. So I moved to Germany when I was 5 years old with my mother back then, but still I have like lots of family in Ukraine, and so I'm kind of faced with the reality of what's going on there. And there's like two sides that you currently hear about what's going on in Ukraine. Like the one people say it's there is no war, it's all a scam, there is nothing's happening there. Then you have the other side of people who are like completely into it and let's say like Russia has bombarded Ukraine and Ukraine needs to like get all the weapons to fight against Russia back, and like there is real war happening. And because I have family there, I can see like more of the reality of what's actually going on the battlefield itself. And to be straightforward, the war is real. Sometimes it's probably a bit exaggerated. But on the other side, especially in Eastern Ukraine, you have real war happening. People die, as well, like the Russian soldiers and the Ukrainian soldiers, like both sides. And um, I had like half a year ago, probably a bit more, longer ago, I had an experience where uh, close friend of our family, close friend of mine, and he was an officer. Officer, is it the right word? Like somebody who has a bunch of people below him in the army. Like he had
Officer.
yeah, hundreds of people who he was leading. And what happened was that um, he tried to save one of his soldiers who was on the battlefield lying in like in the middle of a shooting. And while he was able to, when he was trying to get out of like onto the battlefield itself and drag them back into like a safe spot behind a cover or something, he was shot by artillery. Like there was like a big artillery missile like hitting next to him, and this basically killed him. The guy he was trying to save survived, um, fortunately, but he himself he died, and he was basically somebody who knew me since the day I was born. He was a very close friend of our family, so it has kind of an impact of on our whole family and the whole situation. He had a wife, he had a kid, and it was something very interesting that I experienced when that happened. Because although I'm very like self-aware of what's going on in terms of my emotions and all of that, um, what I experienced was anger came up, like a point of anger. It wasn't even real sadness, it was straight up anger for like somebody who I actually respected and valued died basically for nothing. It's like his death doesn't really impact the war itself. It doesn't stop the war. It's not like less people will die because he died. It's just like another soul that basically left Earth. You could say it like this. And anger hit me at that moment. And I started like to see those patterns of me blaming Putin, blaming the Western world, blaming Biden, blaming Europe and EU and NATO for like providing all the weapons, like just blaming everything, but not actually looking into what's causing the war and how we can actually find practical ways to stop that. And so I had like to kind of zoom out of what I was experiencing in that moment, like let go of that anger and to look at it more practically. And what I realized is just like everybody in this world, no matter if it's like the Ukraine, it's no matter whether it's about the war in Ukraine or what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine or anywhere else, people are very conditioned to just blame other people and society or big organizations or politicians for their emotions and for what's happening in the world. You see it in Palestine and Israel. You see it in Russia and Ukraine. You see it what's happening in Africa and Asia. Like in Africa, the massive slavery and world hunger. Then you have in Asia that extremely bad working conditions people have to um, work in. And nobody, like everybody sees the problems. Everybody sees, well, this is not right. What's happening there isn't best, but nobody actually looks for ways how to practically solve it and how we can actually take responsibility for all of that. People just blame the situation to kind of show that they care, but then they just back off and say like, well, I can't do anything about it. And that's like the main point of that's like one of the biggest reasons, in my opinions, for all the shit that's happening in the world, all the abuse and like everything that's bad, basically, because nobody takes responsibility. And the people who are able to take responsibility are the ones who are causing that because they're like in those positions of power. Those CEOs, politicians, people who have all the money who to be able to influence um, real happenings in the world. But all the other people, the 7 billion people, they go into a point of blame when something bad happens and they say, well, I care. Like I show that I care by showing that I actually am angry about something. But in reality, they just like it's just a complete avoidance of all responsibility.
It's
And to
interesting.
yeah,
Sorry, but it's interesting, like what you had said earlier about, um, your friend dying, being killed, doesn't change anything in the war.
no,
It doesn't, and it. I remember, I don't know if you got the same sort of like propaganda programming as a child, but for me growing up, um, it was always like an honorable thing to die for your country. Like, like these people go off and fight in wars, and because of them, like here in America, we're told it's because of their deaths that we have our freedom. And it's like it's made to be this really patriotic thing, you
It's
know?
so weird too because you're not within that allowed to be like, well, what if that person was like a really shitty person and did something that wasn't best? Like, what if they killed civilians or something? Like, you don't even know what the context is. You're not allowed to question that. But okay, so was it okay for like the Germans in World War II to feel proud about their soldiers? You'd be like, well, no, of course not. They were evil. Okay, so it is possible for a country to be like evil and like the army to do the things that aren't best. Like, but you're not allowed to within yourself. You're not allowed to have those ideas or questions within. So it's this thing that sort of holds the whole thing in place. It's like a really evil thing that we can sort of accept and feel good about in a way because we have this point of, well, okay, but like I'm really proud of them. They're a hero, and like it's like you're a hero. Like they could have died like driving a truck down the road or something for all you know. But it's like, oh, they're so brave. They're a hero. But it allows you to kind of distract yourself from like it's like I know somebody who's like has been in war multiple times and was like even worked at the Pentagon and all kinds of stuff, and like they totally you can see within themselves they glorify the idea of war. Like maybe they don't like it, but it's like it's just a necessary thing. It's a part of our reality, and like it's kind of like it might as well. It kind of I think it just like it gets to that point of as a man of like wanting to be like a hero and like fight for something, and like get that point. But then it's like, okay, so show me one fucking war we've ever fought that actually was legitimate, that couldn't have been avoided, and that wasn't actually some kind of like it was being done to undermine what's
Yeah.
best for everybody in some way, not actually what is best. Like even with the Ukraine thing, like it doesn't really matter what side you're on. The whole thing is fucked and it could just be stopped, And honestly, it's kind of hard not to side with the Russian point in all of this. When you look at the doesn't mean like, oh, I think Russia should take over the world or something, but when you look at all of the information,
The context.
when you look at all of it, it's kind of like it's like if my kids get into a fight and one of them scratches the other one, and the other one punches the other one back. I'm not glad that that one punched that kid back. I'm not on their side. It needs to stop. But I can understand why they did it. I can see, but then it's like, okay, but now how did we start this conflict in the first place? What happened? But I'm not going to be like, oh, I saw you punch that person. You're the bad one. You see what I mean? It's like, yeah.
It would also be like because I'm seeing the hand of Western civilization really is driving this, I would say, from a certain perspective of just like not allowing for peace talks, not allowing for any sort of conflict resolution, actually, unless it's the West totally dominating.
What's
know?
interesting though is that it would be claimed that you and I are victims of propaganda,
Okay.
right? But when you look at what's the counter argument then? Okay. So let's just say, okay, I'm just believing some propaganda and I was just brainwashed by Putin through Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones or whatever. Okay, let's just say all that. But then what's the counter then? So what's the other side? What's the side for no, actually, Putin is evil. He's trying to take over the West. He's trying to take over the world. Like, what's the counter argument? And it's all just platitudes. It's all just like statements that don't have any context to it. Like,
he's
did you
expanding the
guys-
Soviet Union.
go ahead, Mitch.
I can
Well,
share.
And just a theme throughout this whole thing, though, is like when people are dumb, they just believe this shit. And so
Well-
it's like there's like two levels of reality. There's like the level that we're at right now where the average person is dumb and then can be brainwashed. Like we were talking earlier about the food and everything. And then there's the next level of reality, which is what this group represents, which is where everyone has basic education, basic common sense. But that's on us to take the responsibility, right? To like push it that way. Otherwise,
Well,
it's a lot more of this bullshit.
What were you gonna say, Boris?
Yeah, Cameron, I can share like what's the general stigma especially in Germany, and I think that's in the whole Western Europe world, how they view what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Because you said like it's very difficult to like counter argument what Putin did, and it's like more of the Putin side. What I see, what they're saying in Europe is basically first, I would say a statement just. It was Putin, it was Russia who attacked Ukraine. It's like
They're the
they are the
aggressors.
ones who like threw the first stone. Then secondly, why do so many people like try to support the war that is happening and support like they supporting Ukraine with all the weapons? It's because if we don't stop Russia attacking Ukraine right now, and if we just like give up, then Russia will just take over Poland, take over other countries, and like they will just dominate the whole Western world.
Right.
So it's like we cannot allow this. We need to fight back with all our strength.
Right.
This is
But
So-
I mean, look at the practical point behind that, though. Look at it. Like, okay, so Russia right now is challenged with Ukraine, just Ukraine right now, and all we're supplying them with really is like a few soldiers, but mostly just materials, right? Mostly weapons, right? And so if Russia gets through Ukraine, is not the entire West going to team up and fight Russia? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is it like is really the scary thing that Russia is going to have a defensive against everyone? Because literally everyone else is saying like, no, we are standing against Russia.
Can
You
you,
know?
can you? Oh, you already gave me permission. I want to show you something real quick, okay?
Okay.
And actually, I'll make you some context real quick because it's cool. I'm glad you said that, Boris, because that's nothing of what you said was new to me. And I'm not saying that as in any way of degrading. I just mean like,
It's
that
obvious,
is
yeah.
that is the counter. So when I said there is no counter, I just meant there's nothing of real substance. And those are the things that are said. So it's like those are easily seen through, actually, right? Because I know you're just giving like what is the sentiment, right? But I was talking with man. I'm not going to go into the whole thing because it's a lot of context. But I was having some really cool conversations with Max over the past week or so about all of these points because he is
should
talking about things, huh?
Give as much context as you can, though.
Well, he because it's like when your kids can read, which means they can process information, right? Like, okay, imagine you have a TV playing in your house. You got kids 5 and 7, and you got your TV playing all the time, right? Because a lot of people do that, right? And it's got Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or whatever playing, right? And they're talking about all these different things, right? Why aren't your 5 and 7-year-old coming up to you going, hey, what are they talking about? Why did they say this about Russia? Or why did they say this about Ukraine? Or why did they say this about Palestine? What's going on there? What are they talking about? Is the average person's kids doing that?
No.
Like, they're not doing, I mean, we don't have a TV. So imagine that's not even going on. And I might just be having a conversation with Drake on the phone or something, or talking to Katie about something, or listening to a video, which I wouldn't normally be like sitting in the house listening to videos, but maybe I'm working on something and listening to something, and Max comes over and he's like, hey, what is that guy talking about? Right. So like the other day, I was doing some work on the computer, and I had in the background, it was Biden's State of the Union, right? Because I was listening to it, right? And actually, maybe I should play it real quick. That little, it's like a 5-10 second thing. Hold on a second. Biden, where is that clip?
It's becoming so clear. It's
Can you
like
find it
level
while I'm
one.
I don't know what clip you're talking about.
I know, but I'll give you context. That way I don't have to like delay and try to go find it. It's specifically the context. I think it's the opening of the speech. It's close to the opening where he talks about the war in Ukraine and we have to support them. And if we don't, Russia will invade. It'll keep going. It's basically him summarizing exactly what Boris said is the sentiment, right? And if you could just find that clip, and then he explains what we need to do. It's very short, right? But he basically says something to the effect of, so, yeah. Oh, it's like the opening. He's like, we've got war in Ukraine or Russia attacking Ukraine, something like that. And then he goes on for like 10 seconds.
I'll look for it.
Okay. So anyways, that's playing in the background. And Max came over because I don't know, he was just looking for me or whatever. And so he came in. So to kind of, I paused it to be like, hey, what's going on? What do you need? And he was like, what was it talking about? And I was like, oh, it's just, I'm listening to, it's something called the State of the Union. It's a speech that the president gives like basically every year or whatever, talking about how he sees the direction of our country and stuff. And Max like, yeah, but what was he talking about? He said something about Ukraine and the war there. Like, what's going on, right? So like we went back and I played that clip for him, right? And I want to play the clip because it's like someone's talking to a retarded child who has no understanding of anything. And then you see everybody clapping. I was showing him, like, look, there's Johnson, the Speaker of the House on the Republican side, who's supposed to be against Biden, in the grand scheme of the political game. And he's nodding his head. And there's Kamala Harris, and she's nodding her head, and they're all clapping and agreeing with him. And I'm like, right. Biden, State of the Union.
Yeah, it's so clear. It's like there's, let's call it level 1 of reality, which is where we're currently at, where the average person is really stupid. And then there's level 2, which is
Right.
like you're seeing little glimpses of it with this, like this group is what is possible. And like as Cameron's sharing here with Max, like that, like let's make that normal where your
Yeah,
kids can talk about this.
I think I got it. But I can't share it right now because I haven't set those permissions on my
Let me do it.
phone. Okay, go ahead.
Same chamber to address the nation.
Yeah, that's
Congress
it.
and democracy have been under assault at home as they are today. What makes our moment rare is that freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and overseas at the very same time. Overseas, Putin of Russia is on the march, invading Ukraine and sowing chaos throughout Europe and beyond. If anybody in this room thinks Putin will stop at Ukraine, I assure you he will not. But Ukraine can stop Putin. Ukraine can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine and provide the weapons that it needs to defend itself. That is all. That is all Ukraine is asking. They're not asking for American soldiers. In fact, there are no American soldiers at war in Ukraine, and I'm determined to keep it that way. But now, assistance to Ukraine is being
Okay. Yeah, sure. But you notice he's like, they can win if they can if we keep providing the weapons, right? So then I show, because it's like you hear this, right? Now how do you break it down? How do you see the reality? Because you have to put all this information together. And Max I was explaining to him, like, he's saying that Max was like, why is he saying that, right? And I said, well, let's look at it for a moment. I said, when Biden is speaking, is he speaking based on what is like an assessment of what is actually best, or is he speaking on behalf of someone else? right? So I showed him like, let's look at a couple examples. So we looked up Raytheon Corporation, right? And their revenue was like $30 billion last year, right? And I said, what do you think Raytheon makes? Let's look at their website. And it's like missile defense systems, strategic air attack, blah, 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 like all these different weapon things, right? And it's like, let's look up Northrop Grumman, right? And it's like the B-2 bomber, the da-da-da-da-da, all these different things, right? Look at their, so I was showing him how these companies are the ones that are speaking when you see the president speaking. It's not him saying this of his own, like he's looking at what's best. It's these companies are speaking through him because they're making a bunch of money through this, right? And that doesn't per se mean that the war is wrong, right? But I'm saying the president himself in this context is not just like, you know what I mean? It's not him saying like what he actually is seeing, right? Imagine if he decided to say like, no, we should stop. What would immediately happen, right? So then I was like, so then he was asking, so we're just looking at the context of it, right? And I was like, I rewound it, right? And he says, Putin is on the march. And do you think he's going to stop or if you think he's going to stop there, he won't. He's going to take over the rest of Europe, right? Just like what you were saying, Boris, right? But then I looked this up with Max. I was like, let's look something up real quick. Okay, so check this out. Okay. So we looked up, this is a picture of the map of NATO back in 1990. Okay. This was a year before the Soviet Union collapsed, right? And you have all the blue is NATO. And then this pink is what they call the Warsaw Pact. It's like they were basically not a part of the Soviet Union, but said that they would essentially defend the Soviet Union. Okay. And then you've got all the red is Soviet Union. Okay. All right. I'm going to put the other one up next to it. Hold on a second. Let me just make them a little bit smaller so it's easier to see real quick.
Click.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, so here was on the right. Actually, let me switch them around. Oops. There we go. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
Oh, I had it right there the way. Oh, it doesn't matter. This one over here was that original map I showed you. Okay.
Mhm.
And this is like 2022, I think, over here. So the Soviet Union collapsed, and all of these countries that were a part of the Soviet Union are no longer a part of the Soviet Union. And now it's just, you have Russia. Now, when you really look at it, like Russia does not equal the Soviet Union. It was all these countries and Russia all together. So it's like, it'd be like if the United States dissolved as the government and then like Texas became its own country again. Do you know what I mean? And a bunch of the states all just became their own countries, and the 13 colonies just stayed one country or something, right? So when I was looking at this, it's like, imagine if you can for a moment reverse the situation in your mind. Okay, here's NATO now. This is NATO back in 1990. Here's NATO now. So what is NATO? Do you guys even know like what NATO is? In everyone's mind, it's NATO equals against Russia, right? I mean, do you guys see that?
Yeah.
But NATO was originally created to defend against the Soviet Union. Soviet Union does not equal Russia. But in people's minds, Russia equals Soviet Union. Do you see what I mean? So it's easy, like, because Max was, why is everyone against Russia? And I said, because it's easy in your mind, because not his mind, but in the people like my age and really older than me, it's like Russia equals bad because Soviet Union equals bad because communism, but they're not the same thing. But because they were so heavily programmed with it, it's easy just for their mind to just easily connect Russia as like still the bad guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the current mission statement of NATO, and we did this together, I was like, let's actually look at what is NATO, because maybe it says, maybe they switched it from Soviet Union, now it's against Russia. There's no mention of Russia in it. right? It's just it provides for the common defense of its members. And then when you go back and you listen to that Tucker Carlson interview with Putin, where he said, I talked to Bill Clinton and I said, can we join NATO? And he said, I'll have to get back to you. And then he said, no. And then everyone was like, well, let me fact check that. And it's like, oh, wait, that actually happened. They actually said, no, you can't join. Why not? Well, because NATO's against Russia. No, look at, like, actually read and look at the mission statement. It doesn't say it's against Russia. It says it provides for the common defense of its members. So why can't, like, Russia's in the fucking UN, right? Aren't they like on the Security Council? So why can't, like, it makes no sense. So this idea that, okay, let me go back real quick to this map, because I just want to make this point. Like, if you look at this map, okay, let me switch it back here. The order of it. Here's 1990. Here's 2022. Okay, so this is like the year before the Ukraine war started, right? Which thing, Russia or NATO, has advanced across Europe towards the other person?
Obviously, NATO.
And literally everything Joe Biden is saying, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of Vladimir Putin, even if you think he's evil, it doesn't really matter. If you just put yourself in, say, maybe he thinks that way about NATO. I mean, couldn't he literally give the same fucking speech and it would actually be true?
Yeah.
Like, he didn't have to be like, he wouldn't even have to say, well, if we let them have East Germany and Czechoslovakia and Poland, you think they're going to stop there? Or are they going to keep going? He can literally show the map like I'm doing and be like, they didn't stop there. They keep going. Like, well, but look, there's still Sweden and Finland. Well, do a quick Google search. What just happened with Sweden recently? Do you guys know?
Yeah, they joined the NATO, right?
They just joined NATO.
They joined,
Sweden over here. And what's crazy is, check this out. Okay. I'm going to do it in real time. Or hold on. Sweden.
So just for context, this is the context. This is what you were doing with Max, right? The conversation that you were having with Max, right?
Imagine this in 10,000 homes. Right?
I'm kind of like abbreviating it, right? But yes, this is essentially, okay, check this out.
And
Okay,
the point
check this
being,
out, check this out.
okay, go ahead.
Look, Sweden joins NATO Lake. I guess you can have my cookies.
Look at that fucking
Sweden
artwork.
joins NATO Lake on Moscow's doorstep.
Hmm.
The two Nordic countries woke up to what Moscow could do. Oh, blah. Okay, hold on. Where was that?
Woke up.
I'm trying to find. There was one I saw. Oh, man, which one was? Oh, it was on my other computer. That's what the issue was. I think it was like, I thought it was Financial Times, but it was like some just, mainstream. Oh, here it is. Business Insider. Check out this. Okay. With Sweden and NATO, the alliance has new ways to strike Russia's prime targets. This is what we're saying about the consequence of NATO joining, or Sweden joining NATO. We're like, look, now that Sweden's in NATO, we have new ways of attacking Russia. So, like, how can you, in your right mind, like, man, I heard this really great joke listening to Dave Smith, and I wish I can remember the way he said it, but it was like, the essence of it was kind of like, something about Russia. Oh, man, I wish I remember what it was, but it had to do with the context of them being aggressive towards NATO countries or something like that. It's like, if they would just stop, I forget what it was, but it had to do with the fact that the joke had to do with the fact that, like, NATO keeps getting closer to them, right? But, like, that's like kind of like a hidden part of it, right? And it's like, Christine said Finland's a NATO country. Which one is Finland? Is that the one next to Sweden?
Yeah, but I don't think it's NATO yet. Christine.
Yeah. I think they're talking about
they're seeking membership.
So
I see.
it's like, I hate that you have to even say, like, I'm not defending Russia. Like, as if I want another country to be in control of me or something. Like, no, of course not. That's retarded. But that's the way that propaganda works. Is like if you say anything about reality, suddenly you're on the wrong side. Like this is only possible if people are so dumb. So, anyways, to just finalize my point, it's like you listen to Joe Biden. In that speech, was there any context? Or is it just he's marching across Europe? And if you think he's going to stop there, and I'm like, what could we just slow this speech down for a second? Can someone just be like, hey, Mr. President, can I ask a question here? Could you pull up the map real quick and we just look at that and like give some context here?
Just
No,
slow
it's
that
just
down.
either
We're too
clap or
busy
you don't
standing
clap. And
up
if you don't
clap.
stand up and
Yeah.
clap, that means you disagree. And like, oh, okay. And then there was this whole thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene, like saying like something about this woman who was killed by like an illegal immigrant or whatever, and like shouting, and they were having a shouting match about it. And I'm like, dude, it's fucking WWE.
Mm-hmm.
None of this
Yeah.
is real. And it's all a show to subconsciously impulse you with whatever they already decided to do. That's what they're going to do. And there's nothing you can do about it. And this is what everything, like being an American, is supporting all of this. And you're not allowed to question it. And it's like when you read books like 1984, right? The problem, it's a double-edged sword. The problem with art is really good art never says the thing directly that it's trying to say. It tries to make it look like it's about something else so that you can draw the conclusion that it's about this. So when you read something like 1984, it's like, wow, it'd be crazy if the world was like that, because they paint it in this way that's not the way it actually exists.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's this weird thing with posters of Big Brother and like, but you can take those elements, right? Anyways, I showed Max the other day because we were talking about all these points, right? And I was explaining to him about just so many different points of context, right? We even got into like talking about the riots that happened over the summer of 2020 and like George Floyd and like what was that context about, right? And like why was that occurring and what was and the reason we got onto that was because we were looking at the context of Ukraine, and and he was like, well, what's the deal with Ukraine itself? And so we were looking at in 2014 there was a revolution, right? And there was all these protests that occurred. And I was showing them how protests are not always an organic thing. It's like they're manufactured, right? So we talked about the George Floyd thing and why people were angry about it and what's the context of all that stuff, right? So putting all these points together. And so as a kind of final cap on all of that, we looked up some clips from that movie Idiocracy.
Yeah.
Right. And I was showing him that clip about the electrolytes where they're like,
Have you ever
trying to
seen that,
solve the
Boris?
problem with have you ever seen it?
I
Yeah.
haven't. No, I haven't.
Oh, dude.
It's one of Mitch's favorite movies.
Maybe you can give a quick summary.
I'll give you a quick
Have
point.
some
Yeah.
context,
So it's like this guy, he's like an average guy and he's part of some military experiment, just a normal average guy, like average intelligence, nothing special. And they freeze him and then he wakes up like hundreds of years later into the future, right? They unfreeze him or whatever. And so the world has declined so much that now, hold on one second.
Now, like the average IQ is like super low.
and he's like really
low.
smart.
Okay, people are so dumb.
comparatively, yes.
Like
yeah.
they're all like the smartest person is like, like really dumb, right? I think I might have something in there still.
They do this. Didn't they do like some standardized test? And standardized test is like if you have one bucket filled with red paint and another bucket filled with blue paint, how many buckets do you have? And he's like, 2. It's like correct.
So they're like, so he's like the smartest person on the planet now. Okay, right. So they're assuming he's going to solve all their problems, right? So one of the problems, they're sitting at the president's council, right? And it's just a bunch of people with their feet up on the table and like a bunch of like just totally retarded people, right? And they're like talking about how the crops are dying, like they can't get the crops and plants to grow properly. So they take him out to like the fields, right? And it's got these sprinklers going, and like the sprinkler like shoots him in the face, and he's like, what is this? And it's this basically a Gatorade. They call it Brondo, right? But it's basically like a Gatorade, and it's like spraying the plants with Gatorade, right? Or what's called Brondo, right? And he's like, and then it gives this whole breakdown showing like how Brondo became the thing that they used to spray plants with. So like Brondo basically realized that its profits were being challenged by people drinking water. So it bought the FDA, and it bought the FCC. So the FDA is the one that regulates food and drugs, kind of like you were talking about the difference between Europe and America. And then the FCC deals with communication. So like you can't say certain things or whatever. So they bought both of them.
Can you actually buy them?
No,
You
their
mean
government,
like
Well,
you buy the government basically, and
but
people
they
vote-
did actually buy it and they just renamed it
Yeah, I
Brondo,
see,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like an exaggeration, right?
Yeah,
And so I explained to Max, I'm like, see, they're exaggerating it. That actually is how it works. These companies essentially own these things, but they're government organizations. So you think they're legit and that they actually are for you. But that's why they exist. So it's actually more devious in a way, the way it's actually done in reality, right? So in any case, the company buys these things and then they make it so basically water is like the only use of water is that it runs the toilets. That's it. Right. So then so they're sitting in this council. So it gives you that context, right? So they're sitting in this council meeting and he's like, I'm pretty sure the problem is you guys are watering the crop or, feeding the crops Brondo and they need water. Right. And the guy's like, or the woman's like, water? Like from the toilet? From out of the toilet? And he's like, well, it doesn't have to be from out of the toilet, but they need water. And they're like, but they need Brondo. And he's like, why do they need Brondo? And it's like, because it has electrolytes. And the guy's like, yeah, it's what plants crave. Because that was the slogan that Brondo had come up with. Like, it has electrolytes, it's what plants crave. So everyone believed
yeah,
it was necessary.
yeah. Good point. Really good point. Yeah.
Right. And he's like, do you even know what electrolytes are? And they're like, it's in Brondo. And they're like, yeah, it's what plants crave. And they're just like, what are you talking about? Right. So eventually he cannot get through to them of like why he actually needs water. So then it says he just convinces them that like he can speak to plants and the plants are telling him they need water. So they're like, oh, okay. Right. So they just believe he's like this really smart guy. Right. So I showed him a few things like that. And then there's this one scene where the president, is like giving a speech, like the State of the Union, basically. And he comes out with like a machine gun, right? And people are like, you suck, you're a dick. And he starts like shooting his machine gun in the air. And everyone's like, oh, and he goes, that's what I thought, motherfucker, shut up. And they're like, that's like how they're doing like the State of the Union, right? It's so funny, right? So I was like showing, we were looking at some of the context of these things, right? And I guess my point, just to summarize where I'm going with all this, is just like, who's actually sitting down and teaching their kids like, and I'm not saying you have to believe what I'm saying about these points. I'm just showing them context. We're looking at it together because I don't know all of it. Like I know I don't, but I can only see the information that's presented. And I also know that there's no such thing as a conflict where both parties aren't co-creating it. Do you know what I mean? And even to the point where you can have someone who is evil and who is abusing somebody, but there's some level at which the victim is not taking self-responsibility, even if in that moment there's nothing they could do. It could be a consequence of the system, but they're still participating in it. It doesn't mean that they are, quote, to blame. But again, kind of like what you were saying in the beginning, Boris, it's like people are just blaming the elite. And what I was explaining to Max too is like you could replace, if Joe Biden stood up that day and said all the truth about everything, he would just be replaced with somebody else who will say that whatever wants to be said, because he's not the one he's a mouthpiece for. And so the problem is not the people there per se. It's the fact that we have a system that is corrupt, that is not best for all. And so you need both people with integrity and principles, and then you have to change the system itself. Right. So
so Boris, maybe talk about this too. What you've noticed from being here is the next level of responsibility and how it's like for example, right now, if you were in a position of that level of responsibility, to stand in that is like, it's too much, but step by step, that's how we get there. So like, what have you noticed with one, how you're running things in Germany, but then two, you being here, of like what it's like as an individual doing this process to take on more responsibility?
Good question, Mitch. I once had a talk with, maybe it was you, Cameron, or it was Avery. We were talking about people like Donald Trump and Putin and being in a position of power that they are in, the difficulties that you face when you are in such a position. And I was saying, or we were both basically agreeing on the fact that if you if you just put a normal, ordinary person into a position that Donald Trump, Putin, or even Biden or Olaf Scholz in Germany is currently in, no normal person would be able to bear that kind of responsibility. Everybody's blaming them for some kind of stuff, and everybody thinks they would know how to run things, but nobody's actually able to stand in their position physically. It's just the amount of backfire they get from the system and the amount of challenges they have to face. No ordinary person is able to do that kind of stuff. And even me, in my process from like being like that small guy and a child to actually building a business, learning how to sell, learning how to lead groups, how to influence people, and then in the future even getting to positions of where we like actually create private schools, for example. So we find people who want to go into politics, or even us who go into politics themselves and actually say the truth and actually say things that matter. What Mitch was saying about what I realized in terms of taking on that kind of responsibility is actually becoming able to deal with all that bullshit that's coming from the system, which actually boils down to being able to deal with all your emotions in all of that. Because recently I was listening to a video that Cameron posted. It's like 3 years ago, and he said about so many people are not even able to basically sit in front of a camera and say their opinion to the public, for example, social media or somewhere else. They're just not able to. They're so afraid of so many different things. They're not able to face that point. So how is somebody like, with this is the ordinary person, how is somebody like that going to be able to stand in a position of power like Bill Gates or Donald Trump, Putin, whoever it is, like people who are at that level of power, like actually influencing the world with every single decision they make? But most of the population is programmed like that to not be able to do this. And we are kind of the ordinary people as well. We aren't like the 0.001% of the world that runs everything. So it's like something we still have to go through to be able to take on that level of responsibility and to take on the backfire that comes from the system, to take on like when you actually stand for something. Either way, like it doesn't even matter what you stand for, but if you stand for something, somebody will challenge you on that. And especially if you stay for the truth and for common sense, which is not so common anymore today, it's like you get lots of people start to challenge you, which isn't necessarily like bad to be challenged, but the way the system challenges you is not by questioning what you say and actually looking for what's best. It's just like, if you're not following what's mainstream, if you're not saying what is mainstream, if you're not saying what we actually expect you to say, then you're simply wrong and you are right-wing extremists. And this is what happened during COVID, during the whole LGBTQ things, where families are disrupted and so on. They develop like those kinds of words like conspiracy theorist or right-wing extremist, whatever it is, which isn't even like those words don't even apply to those people who say something against the mainstream narrative. It's just those words are emotionally charged so much that they're basically, if you label somebody a conspiracy theorist, like everything he says must be wrong. There's no way that anything that he says has any value or truth into it. And same things with all the other words. So it's just being able to see like through all this bullshit that's like coming from the system to manipulate reality, to manipulate society and citizens, to basically play along, but as a stable entity in all of that, to be able to direct other people with common sense. This was my big realization.
And then how have you noticed too, like being in person? Because for example, right, we talk on Facebook, whatever, we
Yeah.
talk on Zoom, but how do you see taking that responsibility to like be together, like in reality? How has that played a role in your progression in this?
Yeah,
'Cause-
absolutely. It's just the importance of building, just the importance of having local friends and then getting that to a level of building communities with a purpose and with something you stand for and something you share. Why is that important? Because we're social creatures and human beings seek this physical contact to people. Like it's the same reason why I am not just was like hey Mitch, can I call you for like 4 days straight from Germany? Like we can hang up on Zoom for 4 days. It's like, no, we don't want this. We want this physical connection because it actually it has so much value to it. And even like in terms of being able to have a discussion with somebody and being able to discuss important things, the amount of information that you can get from another person by seeing them on a phone screen, screen, or even just hearing their voice through a phone is so limited in comparison to where you actually are in person. And all of that you can see all of that online happening on Instagram, Facebook, and especially like Twitter or X nowadays. It's like if somebody says something like stands for truth, whatever it is, and says the reality of things, people are, if it's just online, it's very easy for people to just unload all their bullshit in the comment section because they're kind of in the safe space back in their home behind the computer screen, in comparison to when you're actually in person. And when you challenge somebody, you can be called out as well without being able to hide between a fake profile. This is like another reason why building something in physical reality, building locally, having like being in person with other people is so important, because this creates like there isn't a possibility of what's happening on social media to be happening in physical reality. Cameron, you muted.
I think I know the answer, so I'm asking rhetorically, but how much have you guys listened to like History of Mankind, for example, with Destiny?
A lot.
You've listened to it, right?
Yeah.
So for anybody who hasn't, you should do that ASAP. But you know, okay, just real quick, some context. Cat Williams, did y'all see any of the? He went on Joe Rogan to see any of that?
No.
Boris is like, I don't own a cat.
Cat Williams is Avery's cat's name. No, but he goes on Joe Rogan and they start talking about all kinds of stuff, dude. Like they're talking about the Anunnaki, they're talking about the pyramids, like just like everything, right? And Cat Williams makes this really cool point in there. He's like, every religion has something about, maybe they don't use the word aliens, but it's essentially what they're talking about, because it's not something from this world, right? Something of aliens and like war in heaven and like all these different elements. He's like, every religion has it, right? So it's just an interesting point of like people thinking like, oh, that's kind of weird and out there. I'm just saying that to handle the objection of like, when you listen to History of Mankind, someone who's a normie, let's say, is going to be like, oh, that's kind of out there. It's like, so is every fucking religion, dude. Like everything is, and even science is out there, dude. The Big Bang, black holes, like, come on, like it's all nothing you have an actual experience of right here in your daily reality. So like, just get over it, right? But what was the point I was going to make with that?
Let me share something about it. It's just people's fear of information. When they feel that something is not the ordinary, because it's actually, people should not fear any kind of information that is out there. You should be able to look at words, at information itself, whether it's History of Mankind or Christianity or Islam or something else, without judging it, or just being able to take in the information and like put it into context and like seeing for yourself whether like this can make sense in context of everything that I know or not. And then basically saying, based on that, okay, this for right now, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. But what people are like, they say, they hear something that's like completely out of the ordinary, or even like not that far away, but just like they don't have any context. They're like, this must be wrong, this can't be right. And it's again just showing like the lack of education, like the amount of stupidity many people have.
And if you can't do that, if you can't step outside of what you know, the system cannot change.
Yeah.
Because it means you will only stick with what you know, which means the person with the PhD knows the answer, or the president is telling the truth. Or it's like you can't step outside of anything of what is already existing.
It's sort of like what Boris was saying. Like it's sort of like whenever you try to do something new. Have you ever had that experience where like you try to do something new and like okay, Cam, easy example for you, woodworking. right? You start on a project and then you get like to a spot where you're like, I don't know what to do here. I'm not sure. Like, am I going the right direction or not? And you kind of stop and you kind of go back, right? And we do the same thing with information. It's the same thing like if you're cooking. It's the same thing if you're like hiking on a new trail. You kind of stop and you're like, is it supposed to look like this? Like
And you
you're going to
question whether you should do it or not, and like maybe
right.
you give up, and then you're like, yeah, this is frustrating. And
Or easy, something that everyone's done is you go to a new location and maybe you have the GPS, right? But like there's all these different buildings around and you're like, is this the right building? Is this the right door? Like, I'm not sure. Like, and you kind of look around and you're like, I don't know. It's the same thing that happens when you're listening to some information that's just outside of your comfort zone, just outside of like what you actually understand. And you're like, you kind of do a pause in your mind. And in that moment, you have the decision of, are you going to keep going or are you just going to turn back? And like Boris was saying, most people just turn back because they don't have the understanding to keep going, right?
yeah, because well, you don't have that new information within you. It's very difficult. So because it's not familiar to you, it's not part of your memory structure. So it's just like it kind of doesn't exist yet within you. So you're not comfortable with it, right? But when you increase your vocabulary, you don't have to know all the details of everything. You're just easily able to see new information and look at it. Doesn't mean you automatically accept the information as true, but you're able to look at this new information and not have this discomfort or this cognitive dissonance of, well, it can't be true because I don't already know it. And it's like, well, it may or may not be true, but you should be able to assess it and be like, okay, what am I do? What is this? Like, what does this mean? Right. The reason I had brought up the history of mankind point was because Boris, you were talking about this point of the value of creating something physically, right? And it's like we're now at a point where we're having to convince each other that building something that's not real is not of the same value as building something that's real.
Yeah.
And when you study the history of mankind, you learn about heaven and you learn about energy and you learn about creating something that's literally an illusion, that's not real, that can fall apart at any moment. So imagine you create the whole context of your life around being in the metaverse. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's say it gets to that point, people like live in virtual reality. It's not physically real. And we've already seen what happens when you try to create this illusionary existence for yourself. Like, it is not based on something physical. It's just based on energy, which means at any moment it can collapse. The interesting thing is if you have a house and, barring some kind of accident, like a tornado or something, like you reasonably know you come back tomorrow, the house is still going to be there. But that's not the case when you're creating something digital. Do you know what I'm saying? How many times have you like got a new phone and you can't access your old phones because they're all the pictures or your old pictures because they're all in the fucking cloud? And now I saw some article about all these companies are starting to like go away from the cloud now. They're like, it's not really what it's all cracked up to be. They want things physically stored and so forth. But it's just like when you're a grandparent, do you want to just see your grandkids over Zoom? Or isn't there a difference when you see them in person and you run up, oh, grandma, and you hug each other? Like, that's a different thing than when you get on the Zoom call. Yeah. They're just two different things. It's not even comparable. And the fact that we're at a point now where we have to convince each other of like, hey guys, really being online and being digital, it's not as good as being physically in person. It's like, that should be self-evident, but it just shows how screwed up our mentality has become. Right. And the thing is, we all know this deep down. We all know it deep down. Right.
Yeah. Boris, how do you make sense of the fact that you got 20-some people coming from Germany to Miami? Like
15, we're like around 15, right? Yeah.
Okay. Like it's really cool to see what you got going on there. I mean, you, Vianney, Scott, like a lot of the core people over there.
Yeah.
But I mean, y'all are flying halfway around the world to be there in Miami.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Because there's some people here who live in Florida who still, need to be reminded of like, hey, you should, drive 2 hours to get there. Like it's I mean, you're very clear, I would say, and in terms of the group and the mission and the purpose, but like, how do you see
so
that?
like why, I guess is what you're asking, like why?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Why we are doing this?
Yeah.
The most simplest answer I can give is like, what else can we do? Like something that Cameron would say. What
Mhm.
else is there to do? That's like the main point. But like to go a bit deeper, I mean, if you actually want to question some things, everything will lead to this point where we are right now with this group and Self-Perfect and Destiny and Technotutor. So it's what we did in Germany is basically like the things we talk about here and on the podcast, we do the same things like locally in our clubhouses and one-on-one, and actually share like the importance of changing stuff. And the most important thing, like, yeah, this is probably the why is there is, if we don't change something about how the world currently works and where it's going, it will all affect us or it will affect our children or both. And that's like, okay, this is reason enough to see the necessity to change things. Because I see how screwed up I am and I was through the school system, through the education that I went through, and like how limited I was because there are like people like Mark Zuckerberg who are, or sorry, it's in German, Mark Zuckerberg, who were billionaires like in their 20s. Like this level of an education, understanding of at least business and sales and where like technology goes, not in the best way, but this is the level of education that they have in comparison to like what most people have, the 99%. That's like a big difference. And you see the gap between rich and poor over the last 50 years that goes apart more and more and more. And we see where all of this leads us. Like the amount of poverty and slavery and abuse that's happening in the world is bigger and bigger. And when I see like when I have kids and I have to put my kids into the current system and like put them through school and everything that people nowadays face, it's not a solution. I don't want that my kids have to go through the same thing that I go through. And so most people see this things like I see them, basically, who are a bit into like changing stuff and like wanting to have an impact in the world. But then they come up with some kind of idea of like, hey, like we can change the world through music. I was discussing that with Mitch yesterday, like those artists actually saying music, this is like my way of changing the world, or like through being an artist or something else. But nothing of
Bitcoin,
that, or
some shit like
Bitcoin,
that.
like Bitcoin is going to change the world and it will be like, this will create equality here on Earth, but this isn't actually a practical solution. This can be part of a practical solution, but it's not like actually that changes everything because the root of all the problems in the world and all the successes in the world is education. And if everybody gets a very bad or limited education, of course, we create all the shit that's going on in the world. So for me, it's at the point where I'm now, it's just very, very obvious that that's the only thing to do. It's like there is nothing else that actually can make sense. So this is like why we can actually persuade people over there in Germany. And while our ability increases to do that, we will get more and more people as well. So it's like this is why we fly over like to another continent just to experience like all of that in person.
Oh, you muted Cam.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave that context because honestly, I thought you were coming over for the Haribos. Just a little change of pace, you know. You want to get those American version ones. No, that's really cool though because it's like the education point is interesting because you brought up Mark Zuckerberg, and it's like if everybody knew what Mark Zuckerberg knew, you would think, okay, then everyone could be billionaires, right? It's like,
No, yeah,
no, because who the fuck would be using Facebook then?
yeah,
Like the reason he got rich so fast was because who knows what the real story is in terms of how it came about, but he was a part of something that could be used to take advantage of the low education level, and it could be used to control everybody and spy on everybody, and like that's why it went so big so fast.
yeah,
So that being said, what we're doing has to get big and, you know, as fast as physically possible, but also realizing that it's going to take time because you have to walk your process. And it's like even now to the point where you see like our kids and what they're capable of. And then there's this whole new wave of children who are basically my third child, Caius's age, relatively, that are kind of in his peer group, because there's not really anyone yet in Max's peer group, that's quite that same level.
You mean like Max is the oldest one to have like that kind of
Yeah,
education?
because from the beginning, for example,
Yeah.
right? So it took time to get enough people to walk their process as becoming a parent or being parents to then see like how to really educate your children yourself. Because who's going to? Oh, I agree, Drake. I was going to Caius. Like who's gonna sit down with your child and explain? You guys went to school. I mean, I know Boris, you went to school in another country, but
Yeah.
Drake and Mitch, you guys went to school in America. Like your history teacher
Didn't know shit.
was probably like a football coach, I'm guessing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I even went to a private school, like a $20,000 a year private school, but $20,000 a year now. And like most of my history teachers were football coaches.
I
Like,
only
there was like the
remember-
honors guy who was like really good, really good or whatever, but was still super liberal biased or whatever.
I only remember one history teacher. I can only remember one. And she was like, she didn't appreciate me in her class because
because you were acting smart.
because I was goofing off in her class a lot.
Oh, you
Like,
were like-
I was talking to the girls. So
Yeah.
and she could see me and she was like, Drake, I can see you. Like like I there's no reason for me to learn this stupid history.
But you see my point though. It's like that's who you're going to learn the context of apparently reality from. And dude, like I'm out here. I'm not going to go into details, but like I'm giving Max like real history books, like the actual. You know how we always say like this point of read the books written by the people at the time.
Mhm.
Like that's what Max is reading now. He's reading the books written by the people at the time, talking about what they did and so forth.
Hey, speaking of which, I saw this because I saw this video of are you guys familiar with the Puff Daddy, P Diddy? You know how
I
he
don't know
changed
what's
his
going on
name?
with that. I keep hearing people talking about
So
it.
he just changed his name again, is mostly what happened. He changed it from Diddy to Diddler. That's his new name now.
So he's
So,
the new Batman villain, the Diddler.
yeah, the Diddler. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, apparently they're calling him like the Black Epstein of rap, basically.
What a name.
It's a
Right?
very specific.
The Epstein of rap, the Black Epstein of rap. Epstein, whatever. But he's basically being accused of having these weird sex parties, drugging people, and holding a lot of blackmail on so many people within the industry, right? And the point that's relevant to what you're saying is someone was making this point of like, hey, the head of security for Diddy he's very suspect. Like it's been alleged that he helped Diddy cover up some murders or whatever, right? And was probably instrumental in those. But he was also previously the head of security for Michael Jackson. And he was like one of the first people on the scene when Michael Jackson died. And he was not originally Michael Jackson's head of security. He was just someone that he was the last head of security that Michael Jackson had after he said like apparently Michael Jackson had some guy who was the head of security for him until he was 75 years old, like for his entire life. And then he retired at 75. And like they had this really great relationship where he was like, you're like a father to me.
Kill him.
Right. And exactly, he didn't kill him. And then like even after that guy retired, Michael Jackson was paying his medical bills until he died, until like he was in his 80s or whatever. And then so Michael Jackson had to go through all these different people. But
Michael
the
Jackson
guy
should have hired that guy's doctor, if you know what I mean.
But apparently what ended up happening with anyway, you guys kind of know a little bit about like Michael Jackson being accused of all the things that he was accused of. But there was also this point that was being brought up about how all these people that Michael Jackson was accusing were part of like the Sony record label. Oh, dude. Okay. I just learned this. This blew my mind. Apparently, in Michael Jackson's will, it gave like, you know how Michael Jackson owned basically 50% of Sony Records, like the actual
Their catalog of music.
exactly. He owned like 50% of it. Like that is insane. And that's usually like they don't let go of that. Like the freaking Beatles didn't own their own music. You know what I mean? Like, and so they don't let go of that because that's where all the money really is within those royalties and everything, right? But apparently, he in his will gave the music to or gave over the rights to it to someone who worked for Sony, which doesn't make sense because it was this guy who actually worked for Michael Jackson years prior that Michael Jackson had fired, right? And so the will was literally written like days before Michael Jackson actually died. And apparently there were 3 witnesses, and the 3 witnesses said, yeah, we saw Michael Jackson sign this at his home in LA.
They were like,
Right.
Michael, can I get your autograph?
Right. But apparently Michael wasn't even in LA. Like the family took it to court because they were like, he wasn't in LA on that day. He was in New York, and we have video evidence to prove it. And these 3 witnesses lied. And-
Actually, he was the ghost of Kiev.
So then
He was busy preparing for the war years in advance because
that's what it was. That's what it was. So then apparently it went to appeals, and they said, oh yeah. All the 3 witnesses said, oh, that's right. We were in New York when we watched him do it. We weren't in LA.
oh yeah, that's right. That's
You
true.
could just do that. You could just
Right. So very
what the
suspect.
fuck.
Very fucking suspect. Right. And then days later, Michael dies, and
Damn.
left in his estate is like, oh yeah, let me just give this all back to Sony. All this stuff that I bought, when he like would talk shit about Sony on stage, you
Yeah.
know, like, and so anyway, the relevant point is that he was talking a lot about, like, he had that song "They Don't Care About Us," you know, where he makes the mention of
Which is
the
way better
anti-
than Thriller or Billie Jean or any of
whatever.
those.
He makes the anti-Semitic remarks, right? And there's a whole bunch of things of him talking out about Jews, or the Jews that, you know, worked for him or whatever. And the point that was being made in what I was watching was this guy was saying, what's interesting is if you go on YouTube, you can't find a lot of this stuff. They've taken down the primary sources.
But you can find Skibbity Toilet, no problem.
Right. Or you can find stuff that's like slandering Michael, no problem. But you can't find the stuff of him making these like supposedly very terrible remarks. Like, or, you know, he's accused, you can see all the things he's accused of, but you can't see him actually saying it or his complaints or anything like that. And they were making this point of like, so how are you supposed to learn any sort of history if you can't find the primary sources? Like, what is that? That's not real history. That's propaganda.
Yeah,
My
you can
guess is
only
kids
go through
nowadays-
the mediators. Yeah.
My guess is kids nowadays don't even know what primary source is, what that means.
Right. No, definitely not. Definitely not. It's going to be like, well, Google said this. And
Right.
so Google's correct.
Another part of that whole rabbit hole that I was talking about with Max is we were looking at, I was explaining to him the whole George Floyd thing, and then I was explaining to him the context of what racism is
Mhm.
versus like how it's used as propaganda, right? And then how, and I was just showing him how all these things like kind of work together. And then we were looking at the whole Google Gemini thing, right? And we were just laughing because I was like, look at all these pictures of all the popes in history, right? And then we were looking at the pictures that Google Gemini created, right? And Max is just like laughing, like how ridiculous it all is, right?
Right. Yeah. Dude, okay, that Candace Owens thing as well. She goes, you know, actually all this information that we learned about, for instance, vaccines, about how like it eradicated all these diseases, this disease, that disease, all that information didn't come out until decades later, when all the people who lived through those diseases were basically like either too old or they were on their way out, like dying, because they actually remember that's not what stopped these diseases. Like those diseases just were kind of phasing out. They were like everybody was becoming immune to them.
Right.
You know? And so she's like, she makes this point of like the history books aren't written until the people that lived through it are either old enough that they don't care or they're dead. So that when you are new, young, and coming up through the education system, you like automatically go like, oh, that must be what it is because you weren't around, so you can't challenge it.
Don't you
Yeah.
imagine like you've seen history, like you knew what happened, and it's like literally you've only been alive since the 80s or the 90s,
Yeah.
and like everything you know about all this huge amount of history was literally just something somebody told you,
Yeah.
and not in a way where it was designed for you to really have all the facts at your disposal to look at it for yourself.
Yeah. Dude, and think about it like this. Like, so before they used to wait. So this is how you know. This is how you know how successful they've been at dumbing down society, right? How successful the school system specifically has been at dumbing down society. Because before they used to wait till the next generation to start shelling out the lies of the propaganda of like, and this is what actually happened back then, right? Now they're doing it in front of our faces and they're switching every couple of years. And nobody's challenging it actually.
Or even every fucking couple days, like back in the day with COVID and the mask.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, wear a mask. Don't wear a mask. We never said wear a mask. We never said don't wear a mask. We never like literally
Never said the vaccine was going to prevent the spread or something.
Right.
Like what? I fucking remember it, dude. Like we
Yeah.
were there, that we were all questioning it.
literally Justin Trudeau is like, I never said like it was mandatory to get the vaccine. I like I never said you had to.
I just said you're a racist piece of shit if you don't.
I said
like you hate people.
You just couldn't participate in anything outside of your home if you don't. You know, like literally you do not go to the grocery store. Do
Dude,
not like
that guy got divorced.
yeah.
Isn't that
Dude.
weird? Like that we would not question like the leader of the whole fucking country can't keep his own like family relationship going.
Yeah.
Like shouldn't that be like a big fucking red flag of like, hey, this is a problem. This person can't communicate with the person they have children with, and yet they're allowed to make decisions that affect 30 fucking plus million people's lives.
Listen, that's
Cameron,
not
you-
fair. It's not fair, Cameron. This is their life. It's like their
Yeah.
personal,
Their
their
truth.
decisions, their
Yeah.
truth.
That's something you don't understand, Cameron. Like it's something different. It's about like emotions, it's about how they feel about their family, and everybody makes mistakes because I got divorced as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, this reminds me of a concept I got from the Peter Thiel book called 0 to 1. But it's like throughout this whole conversation, I've noticed this theme of where uneducated kind of current status quo is like fucked, and let's call that level 0. And then how Peter Thiel explains it in the book, he says going from 0 to 1 is when you unlock something that was not possible before. And he gives an example of like a smartphone. Once you have a smartphone, it's like new abilities open up. And so what I'm seeing though is really it's taking on this process, actually doing it for real, using TechnoTutor, being a participant, like taking responsibility for sharing this. That is going from 0 to 1. And when you look at the world, you start to see that everything is at this level 0. Like even even the people you think are very smart or very educated or very capable, they're still hovering in like not yet
Dude,
taking
all the people who are saying like, oh, you know, Putin is advancing across Europe and he's gonna not stop there. Like they all went to fucking Harvard and Princeton and Yale and have international, you know, studies degrees and all this stuff. Like these are all the quote highly educated people, but that's not
Right.
education. It's so fascinating if you think about it. Education is knowing words and what they mean so that any information that comes to you, you can see what it means. It's not having a bunch of knowledge. In fact, if you think about it, a brand new baby who doesn't know anything, how much more quickly can they learn to use an iPhone than a 70-year-old?
way quicker because
Like-
it's real time.
It's crazy because like our kids rarely, like Caius rarely ever uses our phone. He doesn't have an iPad. But like if you give him the phone, like he can sit there and he knows like how to scroll and like all it's crazy. And he's only interacted with it a few times.
Wow.
And versus like a 70-year-old, because why? Because they have all this knowledge. They grew up, you know, doing what do they that little that they'll
They're like tapping it. They're like, is someone in there?
you know, and like, and then they had to learn how
Morse
to use
code?
the phone, and they were like, I had to turn this, I don't understand, and then like they have to plug the modem in, and they're like, what do I tap, you know, and like they can't figure it out, right? Because they have all this accumulated knowledge. So the knowledge actually gets in the way. It's like, well, you don't understand the Soviet Union and the Cold War and the Bay of Pigs, and like, oh, you mean all those fucking lies? All those individual points that you weren't given the whole truth, you were emotionally impulsed, and that has become not like, imagine, dude, you know that point, I think it was you were saying this, Drake, about how the information only comes out later.
Mhm.
Like everyone fucking knows now that the Vietnam War, we entered that under a false pretense, under
Oh,
a
yeah.
fucking literal like CIA, whatever, manufactured, you know, Gulf of Tonkin, like we
Yeah.
blew up our own ship kind of thing, red flag. Like it's not even a conspiracy theory anymore. Now it's like, oh yeah. So, okay, if that even happened one time, shouldn't we at least be suspicious about everything else that's being told to us? It's like, well, but those are different people. They wouldn't do that now. Bullshit, dude. Because they all went to the same schools. They all
Yeah.
thought about it the same way.
Yeah. Dude.
Right.
Okay, all right. So check it out, because all those stories allow you to participate. It's almost like, you know what it is? It's like when you play a video game, you want to know the backstory of the character. But the backstory of the character doesn't have to be this like it can be a very shallow thing that's like, oh, okay, now I know what my role is. I know what my position is. And that's basically what all these stories are. It's like, so just a little backstory so that you can just, all right, now that's why we got to kill those people. Like, yeah, because Hitler back then, and you know, Mussolini and Stalin and yada yada yada. All right, go kill him. Thanks.
That's why when I talk to people, I have to spend an hour giving context before I make a statement. Because like, you know, the statement will be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
It's like with Max, he'll ask me a simple question, and I'm like, okay, well, let's sit down for a moment. Okay, let me give you some context. And we're talking about something totally irrelevant because I'm trying to help him have all this context to understand the answer to the question. It's not a, but now what the problem is, you go onto the fucking AI thing, it's just going to tell you the answer. So part of the reason I was showing him all that stuff with like all this context, right? And then like the Gemini, Google Gemini, all that kind of stuff was to show him like, look, son, you're going to grow up in a world where everyone goes to the AI for answers. The people who are programming these AIs cannot be trusted. They will put in their bias, and then they'll pretend like, oops, I don't know how that happened. Weird. Oh, I don't know. You know, and it wasn't just, oh, they made George Washington black. Like we watched this video going through where it's like, show me a picture of a nice white family. And it's like, sorry, I can't do that. I can't make images based on race. You know, and also that reinforces stereotypes that whiteness is a prelude, is a prerequisite to happiness or something. It says shit like this.
Wow.
Like I didn't ask you all that fucking stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's literally trying to brainwash you. So imagine a child who's being trained to just go to this AI, and then it's like, show me a picture of a nice black family. Here you go.
And it's funny because like you brought up the Cat Williams interview, right? And he says in there, like, hey, Hollywood is not actually for your entertainment. It's not actually like that's a nice byproduct of it.
Just like what I said about school, man. It's not there.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. But just that point of like, you know, he's saying it's really just programming you to accept the next thing. And I love the example that he gave, because I didn't even consider it, of how he knew that, you know, this whole transgender issue was going to be mainstream 20 years ago.
Oh, when he saw The Matrix?
When he saw The Matrix. And he was like, but he's saying, because, you know, everybody was wearing dresses, all the guys were wearing dresses, and he's like, what's this about? And so he looked into it.
It's like
started
impulse inserting all these points, right? And then you look at it and like all these young black guys. And then you've got the fucking what was that guy, Little Nas X, and that's just totally normal.
Yeah. That's crazy. Right? Did you see man, I was gonna say apparently Andrew Tate tweeted out like Meek Mill, like what's going on with Meek Mill, and allegedly you know, Diddy and Meek Mill have had sex together, and Meek Mill retweeted it and was like, so were you running a sex trafficking ring? and to Andrew Tate, right? Because like that's what he got arrested for, right?
Right.
And it's like maybe that's not the way to like publicly say that in front of everyone, like because that's what everyone kind of sees happen. Like he was running an
But do you see
OnlyFans.
how it's like people that are willing to speak up about stuff, they're already pre-framed as like, don't listen to this person,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? So you it's done in a way that was the whole um
But it's interesting. Like you're saying, okay, you get a story, you get a backstory on that person. Here's the backstory on this person, so you don't have to listen to them, right? I wanted to bring up this point because there were like so many things that we were talking about over this past week. But one of the things was Elon Musk apparently tweeting out that it looks like we're being prepared for something much worse than 9/11, right? Or that is the things that he's seeing, because he was specifically, I think, looking at the point of immigration and how there's so many people coming into this country illegally right now, and how many of them are young men, and it just looks really suspicious as far as, hey, no one's saying anything about this, no one's actually doing anything about this, like it's just okay, just open these borders. And not only that, not only is it all these people being just let into the country, but people actually being flown into the country from other countries illegally with no papers at all. And the Biden administration admitting to it, like, yeah, we flew these people into the country, and they didn't have, we didn't go through the proper channels at all. We just sort of did it. And then making the point of like, but we can't tell you which cities specifically we flew them into because that would be a security risk. Like, what?
why is it a security risk?
Why is that a security? Yes, that is a very good question. Why is it a security risk to who?
Because then we can't hide behind plausible deniability whenever something happens in one of these cities that we told you was going to happen.
Right. So I think that to me was just like a shocker to hear. But also as a part of that story, someone was saying that these Border Patrol agents, remember that story that we heard during Trump's presidency, how he was separating families at the border? Do you guys remember hearing about this?
Yeah,
Right?
and how they literally put pictures of the
Kids in
border.
cages.
Yeah, but it was like it was a Holocaust. Like they put pictures of the concentration camps.
Yeah. Well, apparently, uh, these kids are still coming in through the border, but they're not being separated. In fact, what ends up happening is Border Patrol will call whoever it is that they're said to meet, right? And they'll be usually escorted to the border, they say, by somebody who's like armed. They're handed over. Border Patrol gets the child, and then they take the child and they call and say, where's the address that you're going to? They call that address and they say, hey, are you expecting this child? And that person will say yes. And then they'll just let them go. And when asked, because I guess somebody was being interviewed and they asked him, okay, so when the Border Patrol calls this person or whatever, do they do some sort of investigation on them or anything like that? They say no. They say, is it possible that any of these kids are going into like sex trafficking or situations like that? He's like, not only is it possible, it's definitely happening. It's definitely happening. And they said, so why don't we do anything about it? Like, the hands are tied. This is the system that we have right now. We can't. We were told we can't separate these kids. Like now.
Can't put them in a cage, so
No.
clearly we have to give them to a sex trafficker. I mean, what other obvious conclusion could we draw?
Right. It's crazy, right? But that is the system that we have today. Is we're okay here in America, in the US, the system that we have is taking children from other countries or whatever and putting them in positions where
You don't know anything about who's giving them to you, where they're coming from. You don't know anything about where they're going, and you're literally like, "Oh, sure, here, yeah, I'll deliver this child to you." Like it's the fucking UPS of children service.
right. Like you would think, I mean, like people are always saying that they care about children or whatever, but like we have a system, like you can see like out there afar, sure, I guess you could make a case it's not in front of your face, you're not seeing it, but it's happening under our noses here in this country.
Not in front of your face because you have a fucking Apple Vision Pro strapped to it.
Dude, I went to the Apple store
You got
recently.
12 fucking TikTok streams popped up there in front of you while watching ESPN, and you're like, I don't see any children suffering. Like, yeah, no shit.
I went to the Apple store recently because I was having some issues with my laptop. And while I was there, you know, they have the Apple Vision Pro there. And I was thinking about trying it on. But you have to set up an appointment to do it. So I was like, I don't really care that much. But I was watching the way they have it set up. It's actually really interesting. They have these like couches where they have the people sit. And I was seeing they have it's like as if you walked into a dealership, right? The way that it's set up, because they're on these nice fancy couches. They're all wearing their Apple Vision Pro. And then you've got the sales rep sitting next to them with an iPad in their hands. And they're like going through their script of like, yeah. And like you can see like they have these like very scripted intonations and the way that they're moving. And like they're sitting all next to each other. So the people wearing the Apple Vision Pro can't see what's happening, right? But I'm watching and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Look, like this guy's doing it. Okay, now that guy's doing it. Now this guy's doing it. And this.
They're just following the same script. Yeah.
They're all
Interesting.
following the same script. And it's
You
just,
couldn't get a humanoid robot to do that.
Dude, and it's connected to their Apple Pay. Like, think how like slick that'll be at the very end. They don't even have to pull out a credit card. Just like,
Yeah.
you know, tap the Apple
Just give me
Pay.
a thumbs up real quick. All right.
Yeah.
click that button, right? Yep. Verify with your voice. Say yes, 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 yes. Okay, good. All right, you can leave now. You can leave now. Thanks.
Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's fucking nuts. The state of the world. It's really nuts. You imagine though with like our kids, and we will find a way to be able to tell them like, hey, look, this is how crazy it got. But like we're working on it. I mean, for all of us here, I know we plan on being around for the next fucking 50 years. And either the next 50 years is going to be a slow or fast track to more hell, or it's us step by step, point by point, fucking creating heaven on earth.
Yeah, it's definitely a fast track to hell. It's no doubt. Like it's irrelevant at this point about preventing, because I mean, I'm not saying there things can't be prevented further,
Mhm.
right? But for anybody who's just like, oh no, I can just sit and wait. No,
Yeah.
it's like you're on the train track. It's going off the cliff. So now the question is, are we going to prepare the future to solve these problems? Because there's already so many fucking consequences. Start looking at the birth rates.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and we're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah.
We're doing it to ourselves. It's like, well, all these media companies are brainwashing us. It's like, why are we listening to them? Why are we wanting to be entertained? Why do we need someone else to tell us this information? Right. And then with the AI stuff, it's just going to get crazier, man.
Yeah.
And like, guys, it's March 10th. You know, we have a presidential election coming up at the end of this year.
Yeah.
You don't think it's about to get fucking crazy? Like, do you guys remember what happened in the summer before the last presidential election?
There was a guy that died or something.
Right. There was COVID and there was George Floyd.
Oh, that was all at the same time. That's right.
That wasn't
Yep.
even AI yet, dude. That wasn't even we have AI yet.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not going to get crazy. So now imagine the stability you're going to have to see through all the bullshit that's coming and to support other people. In a certain sense, it's interesting because more people are going to wake up. Wake up just means they're going to be like, what the fuck's going on? They're going to have that opportunity. So anything, it's like when you try to force somebody to do something and they resist, you're just making the resistance stronger, right? So all the stuff that's going to happen this year, it's going to create more waking up. I mean, we saw that with COVID. It created a lot of people to wake up. They didn't have a solution. A lot of people, what happened was because we didn't have the systems in place yet to really get to all those people. They just went back to religion. They went back to a bunch of bullshit. Right. That's why we have to become more effective at communicating with people, and it has to be one-on-one. I mean, I just like Alex sent me this another text today about like something he saw on Twitter, because I'm not on there, and it was like some ad, and it was like some guy saying, "Oh, I bought this house when I was 19 years old or whatever," and it was like community notes. This guy is claiming this. He didn't actually buy this house. This house is currently for rent, and it was just like talking shit about the guy's fucking ad right there. I'm like, I mean, I don't know if that's even true or not. I have no idea because I don't even know what that thing is. But imagine you're like posting anything about anything.
Yeah.
I mean, the question is, how did they determine that that's the truth about it? I mean, it may be true. I don't know. But like, you make a statement. Who determines what the correct, truthful response is? The community? You mean the same community that's allowing the fucking war in Ukraine, that's allowing all this shit?
Yeah.
Who gets to determine what the truth is? Do we get to vote on that? Like, I mean, like we were joking around. I didn't vote for daylight savings fucking time. But I woke up and it was suddenly an hour later than it was supposed to be. What the hell?
Yeah.
I didn't tell them to do that. So it's like you have to support your children. I say at the very least, meaning not because it's the only thing, but at the most basic level, to not just accept this authority says this is true, like to really question it, to really look at it. And I mean, it's so interesting with like that thing with Biden's speech. You can very quickly just, I mean, I didn't script any of that. We were just like, let's look into this. What is NATO? What is it about? How did NATO exist before? Like, and you're like, hold on a second. None of what you're saying makes sense. That doesn't mean you have to side with the other side, but clearly we're being manipulated here because this doesn't make any sense. And then on top of that, to realize we've committed 90 something billion dollars to the Ukraine. That's just to Ukraine in this context, in this war conflict situation. And then we looked up how much would it cost to solve world hunger? It's like 30 billion a year.
I think it was saying 30 billion of each country a year.
Is it?
Yeah, that's just the way I interpret it. Not of every single country in the world, but of each country that has influence in the world. So if you Google that once again, it should be what it says.
That's an update.
Either way.
But either way, like it doesn't really matter. It would be like, let's say 500 billion. It's still, the money is still used for war and
but I'm saying
all
the
kinds
90
of
billion that
abuse,
we're
yes.
sending is just from our country.
Yeah.
And that's
Like,
just
it's
one very like small isolated fucking thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
What about the money that we're sending to Israel, that we're sending to fucking, who knows, Uganda? Like, what? And the point though is, it's not about, oh, we should use that money to solve world hunger.
Wait, hang on. Wait a minute. Just a question that came up is, how are they considering like to solve world hunger? Like, is it through a big fucking farm?
Right.
Because like if that's the case, then it's like you're way overestimating how much it actually costs to solve world hunger, actually.
Well,
Because-
and even just applying $30 billion a year may not solve the problem. Do you know what I mean?
I'm just saying, like, okay, if instead of having lawns, like this is a common argument that people have.
Yeah, that's
It's
my
like,
point.
if instead of having lawns, you had fucking, fruit trees and vegetables and gardens and shit like that, and you had the education to know how to fucking do that, or raise your own cattle, all that shit, like, you wouldn't need 30 billion. That's for sure.
Right. So my point, I guess, was not so much that, look, we shouldn't be sending the money here, we should spend it here, because even the way it would be spent there wouldn't, in essence, solve the problem.
Right.
It's kind of like just giving the money to people who are still in a state of lack.
Right.
It's education, because now how do you raise a garden? Like, we're learning that. Like, we're doing a bunch of more like bigger scale gardening here now where we live, and having to learn, like, when should we plant these things? Like, it got cold last night, so we took all the tomato plants back out of the ground that we had just put in there. So like, I think they might die tonight, and then it's like, when's it gonna stop doing that? Like, you have to
You don't
learn
have an almanac?
Huh?
You don't have an almanac?
We do, but the master gardener says they're not planting yet, but everybody else says, no, we're planting now because the summer is going to happen sooner. So we got to get them in the ground. Like, again, it's all stuff that you don't know. Right. So it's a process. So, but again, that's the actual solution, is why can't everybody have a cow? And then look, you got milk, you got more than enough milk for your family.
Yeah.
You would,
And when that cow dies, or when you harvest that cow, you've got more than enough meat for your entire family for an entire year from one
Mhm.
cow.
Mhm.
You know,
And that
It's
one
like,
cow makes another cow, by the way. It's like a 3D printer for cows.
wow.
Yeah. And but then why would you ever need to buy Kraft cheese? Which ain't even really cheese.
This is not cheese. That's not cheese.
Allegedly.
No, it says on the fucking package, cheese product.
For entertainment purposes only.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it all comes down to education, which again isn't necessarily everyone should know this information. It should be everyone has the ability to read and understand, because if you go, it has to be this information, you don't necessarily know if that information is 100% fully correct. It's only based on what we know so far. So education cannot be based on this information, because we're still learning as human beings. We're still learning about reality. We don't know. And again, I always come back to this point. We act like we're the most advanced we've ever been or something. It's like scientists can't even agree on what's the fundamental nature of reality. Is it a simulation? Is it particles? Is it strings? Is it fucking loops? Like now they're saying it's quantum loops and stuff. Like they don't fucking know anything about the most basic shit. And we're trying to say like, well, no, I know why Russia invaded Ukraine. It is because of this reason. It's like, dude, go and study fucking World War II. Do you know where World War II started? And you start realizing Hitler invaded Poland, and then you start looking at the context of why. And it's like, oh, because he was going to Poland, then he wanted to dominate the whole of Europe. And it was almost the exact same situation where it was like Germans in Poland were being persecuted, kind of like the Russians in Ukraine, that whole story. Now, do I know if any of this is facts or not? I'm just saying, why isn't any of that being discussed? Like, well, if you expose people to this stuff, then maybe suddenly they'd be on the side of Putin or something. Like, well, but that should be a problem, that if you expose them to the truth of it, that you would be against what you're saying you should do.
Right.
We should at least all be on the same page of what's the reality, so we could make decisions about it. Instead, nobody knows what the fuck's going on. It's all just propaganda. Everyone's being manipulated. How is that ever going to solve the problem? Like, the approach that we're taking, even if it's based on truth, are we approaching things in a way that is like, let's say Putin's a madman who wants to take over Europe. Is the way we're approaching it reducing the likelihood of him continuing or increasing it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like if you see a neighbor's dog that barks at you every day, so every day you walk past it and kick it, is that helping you? Like, what if you just started feeding it? Don't you think it'd be suddenly your friend?
Yeah. Or just avoiding it.
Or just talk to the dog. Yeah.
Or
That's
you
what I'm
just
saying,
call
like,
Valley, and Valley will help you figure it out.
Even if you accept the premise, it still doesn't mean that this approach makes sense. Like, name one fucking time we've ever done this that ever worked out.
Right.
I mean, you go in and you
It
have
just
this
works out for a few. It works out for the groups that own the fucking military industrial complex.
Well, what's crazy about it is like a bomb, you pay for it and then you destroy it. That's the nature of the product. It's like if you could take planned obsolescence and make it the essence of the product. So it's like, well, we
It's
got
literally, yeah,
we
manufactured
got to buy
obsolescence.
more because we already used them all. It's like imagine if you could sell somebody an iPhone and then it literally breaks the moment they get it, so you immediately have to buy another one. Like, if Apple could do that and people would accept it, I'm sure they would do it, allegedly.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
And that's the nature of war. It's like, oh, and we got people, they're born every day, so we'll just, who cares? They're totally expendable. I mean, do you think that the elite who are like tripping off on power, like, care? They don't care. And the problem is we can't blame them and be like, well, if we just get rid of them, like you were saying, Boris, the average person can't stand in that position of reality. Yeah. It's like, imagine you take somebody, okay, perfect example of it. Walmart. You take the guy who is the greeter at Walmart, okay? And you make them the manager of the store.
Store's fucking crashing.
It's not going to work. They're not going to even know how to talk to people. They're going to be like, oh, wait. Oh, no, we're like, any little crisis, they're going to suddenly melt down. Like, there's a reason why the person who's the manager is the manager, because the company knows they can handle this certain level of responsibility.
You know what I just realized is growing your own food has actually just become less expensive.
Oh, totally. Well, I don't know if it works out yet, but you might be right.
No, hear me out. Like, going and buying food from the grocery store like we all know the food prices have gone up a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like Christine likes to bring up this point of like she saw, because I would just keep a bunch of receipts. I would keep a lot of receipts from the grocery store. And so when Christine first came down to visit, she would see all these receipts just lying around, and she'd be like, "You gotta throw these receipts away or something." I'm like, "No, I
You're like
need
one day,
I gotta use them for something. I don't know, some sort of tax write-off. I don't know, right?
groceries. I know that should be, but it's not.
Right. You don't pay taxes on groceries, so you can't. But anyway,
Wait, you guys don't pay taxes on groceries?
not on food.
Not on it's certain
That's
types of food.
crazy.
Certain
Yeah.
types of food.
Yeah,
That's a
if
privilege.
it's like produce, you don't pay tax on that.
We pay
um,
20%.
But
now
your
we,
gummy
now we
bears
know why
are-
it's clean.
Yeah.
Now we know why it's clean.
See, but this is what I was saying. It like comes with a fucking price, doesn't it?
Right.
You know, and dude, you don't even have free speech in Germany. There's certain things that I'm being very careful not to say right now because you're on the podcast, because I don't want to create a consequence for you. You see what I'm saying? Like, think about having to limit what you say because you're afraid of the government. Like, that's insane. The government should be to serve everybody. It should be your best friend. It should not be something you're afraid of. That's not the fucking reality that we've created for ourselves.
Yeah. But so anyway, Christine saw one of those old receipts recently, and she was like, "Holy crap. Like the amount of money that you were spending back then, like just prior to COVID, compared to now is a world of difference, a huge world of difference, right? It's like things are like almost triple the price these days." And the point being basically like these prices aren't going to come down. We know that. We know the prices are not just going to drop and like, oh, you know,
Yeah, but you have to say like your income tripled, so
yeah.
the average income tripled.
Whose income tripled? Who out there who's working a job, their income tripled? Yeah, right. And so, but look at that point, right? It's like, okay, so it's now more expensive for you to buy groceries, and the value of your labor has gone down. Therefore, if you put your labor into making your own food, right, the price of gardening, of growing your own food, is less. Does that make sense? It's like, and so, you know, it may not be like right away because you gotta start off with a lot of materials. You gotta start off with like the compost, and you know, the seeds and the plants and et cetera, the land, all that, right?
Dude, the idea that you can just go off grid too. Like, I'm just
I
gonna
know.
go off grid. Like, I
I
don't need
know.
money. I'm like, dude, like, do you even know
How are you
what
gonna feed your fucking
cost?
chickens?
Do you know
But-
what a tractor costs? Do you know
Yeah.
what fucking PVC pipe costs? Like, give me a break, man.
But if you have all that in place, if you have all those systems in place, then the cost of growing your own food has dropped because your labor is valued less.
And now imagine you live in New York City
Yeah, sorry.
and like you don't know shit. You don't even know anything about growing anything. Like, and
Right.
you don't even have the opportunity anyways. Like, it all comes down to we don't have a system where the purpose of it, the design of it, is to consider what is best for everybody, and we don't have the education levels for everybody to even operate under that. So it's like the whole thing about Jesus. Yeah, like somebody asked me the other day, "Do you believe in Jesus Christ?" And I'm like,
Who asked you? Never
how
mind.
many people claim to believe in Jesus Christ and don't fucking listen to his message or follow his message at all? You could say you believe in it and it's all self-interest, like, oh, I'm saved, and like, well, his message is to just make sure other people believe. And it's like, but then you'll complain about the food prices, you'll complain about the cost of gas or petrol, you'll complain about the fucking whatever.
It's funny how people will ask you if you believe in Jesus. Like, it's like, how is that relevant to you?
That's like if I said, do you believe in Drake? Hey, Mitch, do you believe in Drake? Wouldn't you be like, no, I know Drake. What do you mean, do I believe in him? Do I believe in
Yeah.
him?
You don't believe in me?
Like, I mean, I believe in you, man. Like, hey, you could do things. You could do,
Okay,
I believe in you. Yes.
Yes.
But
That's-
what does that mean? I believe in
Right.
you. I
Right.
believe in you, dude. Like,
What
well,
he
think
did
about-
for you on that cross.
But imagine if you were like always feeling anxiety that if everyone stopped believing you, you wouldn't exist. That's really what it is.
Yeah, and you need to be
Go
worshipped.
study the history of mankind and you'll realize that's why all these entities existed, because people just believed in it.
Dude, that's like Santa in the movie Elf. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. He needs some magic juice, whatever.
It's like the
belief
war in
power.
Ukraine. You know, like that point Boris was making, like some people believe it's not even really happening. It's really happening, but it's only happening because we believe in it.
Mhm.
You know, like I was reading a while back, there's this book called A Farewell to Arms by, I think it's by Ernest Hemingway, right? It's a really cool book. And in there's this scene, because it's about World War One, and there's this scene where they're talking, and the one guy's like, you know, if everybody would just stop fighting, this war would end. And they were all like, it was like people were like really cynical about it, like, no, we have to fight because, you know, and all this stuff. And it's like literally, if everyone just stopped fighting, it would just be over. That's it.
I saw this clip of Billy Carson. He was
Oh yeah,
he was making
commercial guy?
huh? No,
Which guy is that?
no, the black guy. The black guy, he's fuck. Something, huh?
The Tybo guy?
No. Billy Carson, the guy, he speaks about the Anunnaki and shit like that.
Yeah, I think you've told me about that guy, but I've never listened to him.
What? No way, you've never listened to him. No. You definitely have. We'll talk about it later. But anyway, he was making this point of like, if 40 million, not even all, but he's like, if 40 million Americans just decided we're not paying taxes, we're just not, 40 million working Americans just decided, yeah, no, we're not doing that this year. We're done. Right. Or how, the country was shut down or there was all these lockdowns during COVID. If instead the American people decided, you know what, we're just not going to the grocery store. We're gonna, we've got our own storage of food for the next month or two, right? We all work together. We're just not gonna buy things all willy-nilly. We're not paying taxes. He said that would definitely cripple the nation. Christine sending me Billy Carson. I said Billy Carson, right? I said Billy, right?
I think so.
Okay. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that's his name. Anyway, but he's saying like, if we all just stop participating in paying taxes, what could they do to us? Where would they get the money to like, you
But at the same time, not to justify it, but let's just say this is the problem with it. What would happen if the US government totally shut down?
There would be chaos for sure.
Not only chaos, like, don't you think at least one other country in the world would be like taking it over?
Mm-hmm.
We're sending in troops, we claim it. And that is also part of the fucking problem, because then it's like, well, that's why we have to defend ourselves. And it's just this whole thing. Like, it will never end until everybody is on the same page. Like, we are all humans. We are all life. We all have equal value, equal to everything. It's like, and we have to have systems that actually considers what's best for everybody. And we don't need to fight with each other. Isn't that what Jesus was trying to say? Some people say like, oh, I believe in Jesus. And it's like, well, what are you doing to implement that? Because it's not going to come from just everybody believing in Jesus. In fact, the problem with that is you're immediately creating yourself as inferior to solving the problem. Because you're like, the only way that this can be solved is if this person comes back and solves everything once we all believe in him. Well, 2,000 years later, I still don't see any sign of that ever happening.
And let's even we're talking about this.
Could have worked, but it's not going to work now. It's definitely not going to fucking work.
We're talking about this the other day. Imagine Jesus magically actually comes back, right? Some guy's walking around like, no, look, like it's actually me. It's Jesus, right? And we'll be like, dude, who the fuck are you? What do you mean you're Jesus? No, we're waiting on the real Jesus, right? And they like crucify him again. It's like, that's
he'd probably be like anti he'd probably be like a conspiracy theorist, right? That's what
exactly.
They probably would have put him in school, right? He'd probably be neurodivergent.
Yeah.
That's a whole other can of worms we have to talk about next time.
Yeah. I really want to hear that story. But all right, so you guys ready to wrap it up?
Yeah. Boris, anything else to share for the record?
I think we covered most of the important topics today. Yeah.
I think we should always check in with Boris at the end of a podcast just to make sure we cover it.
Boris, did we cover it? Did we cover it? For yeah. All right.
Yeah,
I guess you guys need to stop buying into the stories. Come to the self-perfected event.
Yeah, and like fucking take more responsibility, you know? It's fucking uncomfortable. Like me and Boris, we're fucking upgrading hard. Sometimes it doesn't fucking feel pleasant. But do we operate from our feelings or do we operate based on what's best? Obviously, what's best.
I mean,
So-
what's the other side? Like, what's the other
Right.
solution to that?
Oh,
I
just
mean-
just relax and chill out and just like smoke some weed and chill and watch Netflix all day and like, oh, that'll never get boring. That'll never. You ever like binge watch a show for like hours and hours? How do you feel afterwards?
Horrible.
Dumb,
feel
fucking
shitty.
stupid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, like, imagine you just spend all day in the metaverse or some shit like 20 years from now. Like, are you gonna at the end of it just feel so fulfilled and shit? Like, give me a break, man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys at the event.
Let's
Yes.
go. All right.
Miami.
See
Bye.
you.
Bye. I don't know how to turn this off. Sorry, guys.
Part 2. All right, this is the after.